Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about Footloose, both the 1984 and the 2011 versions, because a lot of what I want to talk about is how the two films differ. But those differences are definitely not in the basic plot outline. That's pretty much identical. After his mother's early death, big city teenager Ren McCormack moves to the rural town of Beaumont to live with his maternal uncle. Ren's dad is not in the picture. Shortly after arriving in the small community, Ren is shocked to learn that dancing and loud music are both banned within town limits. The reason for the ban was the death several years before of four teenagers. They had a car accident while driving home from a party. Key amongst this quartet was Bobby Moore, the son of the local reverend, who was a very influential figure in the community. Now, big city kid Ren, with his love of rock music and high intensity gymnastic dance, is not an easy fit for the conservative rural community, and his burgeoning, if slightly reluctant, interest in the Reverend's daughter Ariel gets him further offside with the Reverend. It also puts him on the outs with Ariel's secret paramour, a rather loutish fellow by the name of Chuck. Ariel, you see, is secretly rather wildy than she lets her father know. In any case, Ren's arrival in town certainly makes plenty of waves, and conditions get even choppier when he starts leading a push for the ban on dancing to be lifted. Can Ren win the day and win the girl? Well, of course he can. It's a movie, and as the title tells us, he's got to cut Footloose. So the original version of Footloose had some difficulties finding a director. Paramount initially offered the job to Ron Howard, but he turned it down to do Splash. So the studio instead turned to Michael Cimino. The 1978 Oscar winner had been unemployed since the financial dumpster fire that was his 1982 vanity project, Heaven's Gate, and perhaps Paramount figured he'd understand the need to deliver on time and on budget. As it turned out, they fired him a month later after he not only demanded to be allowed to rewrite the script, but also that he be paid $200,000 for doing so. The new director, brought in after Cimino, brought in the film on budget, and despite mediocre critical response, the film would be a big commercial success, becoming the seventh highest grossing movie of the year. The most interesting story behind the 2011 production, meanwhile, at least to me, is that Miley Cyrus was seriously considered for the role of Ariel. No disrespect to Julianne Hough, who ultimately landed the part and does a solid job. I kind of wish we got to see the version where Miley took it on. In any case, like the original, the 2011 version had mediocre reviews. On the box office front, meanwhile, it was a modest success, but certainly well short of its progenitor in financial return. Which is a shame because, honestly, it's a better movie. Let's talk about why that is, and also why the improvements weren't enough to launch it to greater success. And one thing I like about the remake is that they've made Ren much more proactive and self-possessed. In both versions of Footloose, Ren is treated with suspicion and distrust because he's from the big city, and several times gets blamed for things that aren't his fault. In the original, however, Ren gets blamed unfairly, is as far as this goes. Ren is rightly resentful of what happens and protests his innocence, but he's given no agency. These are just things that happen to him. In the remake, Ren's much more vocal in pushing back and also more successful in doing so, at least in part because he's quicker to recognise a bad situation and take steps to mitigate it. He can't prevent suspicion and distrust, of course, but he has a lot more agency to fight back against it. Ariel also gets an upgrade in some ways, although this is a bit more uneven. In fact, the remake actually tames her behaviour down compared to the original. 1984 Ariel is quite the wild child indeed. But in the climax of the original movie, she's basically entirely sidelined. She just stands around and cheers on Ren and some other guys as they do stuff. In the remake, meanwhile, Ariel gets to be physically involved both in the final denouement of Ren and Chuck's rivalry, and then, perhaps more importantly, given that this is a movie about dancing, she actually gets to do some dancing in the big dance finale, something she was conspicuously denied in the original. And speaking of dancing, the dance sequences are better in the remake. I don't just mean this in the sense of them having far more highly trained dancers doing more sophisticated steps and moves, though they do and they are, but also in the sense that the dance choreography is better matched to the music. The dance finale is a good example of this, with the specific beats of the dancers tying into the title tune more closely. But an even better example is Ren's angsty solo dance of frustration in a disused factory, which occurs roughly halfway through the movie and begins to bring him and Ariel closer together. In the original, this dance sequence is a very impressive piece of highly gymnastic dance performance. They used 4 different body doubles to perform all the necessary moves. But to me, what we're seeing on screen feels very disassociated from the piece of music to which Ren is supposedly dancing. Good choreography should tie the visual art of the dance to the oral art of the music, and I just don't think the original film does that very well. The remake has a much better handle on it. So, why didn't the remake's improvements launch it to greater success than the original, or at least similar success? Well, I think in part it's because there was something in the early 80s zeitgeist. Fame, Flashdance, A Chorus Line, Footloose. This is very much a time when dance movies were hitting it big, which probably explains why it's also a time of less successful sequels to earlier musicals, with both Grease 2 and Staying Alive hitting screens in this era. Side note, I actually liked both those movies more than their predecessors, but that does not appear to be a commonly held position. In any case, 2011 didn't seem to have quite the same dance mania going on, and so the fact the story is quite weak is more obviously an issue, because despite the improvements the remake has made in certain elements of the script and production, it doesn't really address the fundamental issue of the plot, which is that the solution to the whole dancing is banned in Beaumont conflict is trivially easily. I mean, it's deep in how did no one do this already territory. And honestly, even if it wasn't trivial to resolve, it feels like the supposed conundrum is a bit of an empty one to begin with. These are American teenagers in a rural location. They all have cars. What's stopping them just driving to another town to dance? Absolutely nothing, because we see them do it halfway through the film. So yeah, whichever version of Footloose you happen to watch, just don't think about the plot too much, because the filmmakers sure didn't. Just go along with the toe tapping vibes. Next time, Margot's got money troubles, which is a situation a lot of people can probably empathise with. We'll be looking at the first season of the show, which came out earlier this year and which largely depicts the events of the book on which the show is based. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've seen either version of Footloose, let me know what you thought of them.